Welcome to This Explainer. We're diving right into a seriously fascinating and turbulent period in history today. We'll be looking closely at how early politicians navigated the massive, highly fragile tensions surrounding language, religion, and immigration in Canada. It's the story of a young country desperately trying to figure out exactly what it wanted to be. And as you'll see, the growing pains were incredibly intense. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with a fragmented new nation, move to the Manitoba Schools Question, unpack Laurier's slippery compromise, look at expanding West, growing tensions, and wrap up with the backlash in Ontario. Section 1. A fragmented new nation, unifying a diverse land. So, right after Confederation, just signing a piece of paper didn't magically create a unified people. Actually, this young country was incredibly fragmented. You had the original inhabitants, First Nations and Inuit, living alongside French and English colonists, the Métis, and suddenly a rapidly growing influx of new immigrants arriving from all over the world. Figuring out how to unify this vast expanse of land led to some major conflicts. This 1910 photograph of a Jewish restaurant sitting smack in the middle of a Toronto neighborhood brilliantly illustrates the changing face of the era. Immigrants were bringing in new languages and cultural traditions that were just entirely different from the established norms. Put yourself in the shoes of the locals back then. How do you think the existing, mostly English-speaking residents reacted to this sudden, highly visible cultural shift right in their own backyards? I mean, it was a massive demographic transformation, and frankly, it made a lot of established citizens pretty anxious. And that anxiety? It bred a very specific ideology. A lot of English Canadians genuinely believed ethnic diversity was a literal threat to national unity. Take J.S. Woodsworth, for example, a Protestant minister who worked in immigrant districts. In 1905, he flat out stated that we must have one language and declared the public school as the most important factor in, quote, transforming the foreigners into Canadians. For them, the ultimate goal was strict, uncompromising cultural assimilation. Section 2. The Manitoba Schools Question, the flashpoint. Well, this push for assimilation hit an absolute boiling point out west. Just watch this rapid legislative reversal. Back in 1870, Manitoba was largely Catholic because of its French roots, so French Catholic educational rights were formally guaranteed. But then demographics shifted. English settlers flooded in. By 1890, Catholics made up less than 15% of the population. So that same year, the provincial government passes the Public Schools Act, completely ripping away those guaranteed protections and making English the only official language. French Catholic leaders obviously fought back, leading to a massive 1895 British High Court ruling that essentially said the federal government actually did have the right to step in and strike the provincial law down. Here is the crucial takeaway. This was no longer just a local provincial spat. It escalated into a full-blown national crisis. It literally broke the federal Conservative government, forcing Prime Minister Mackenzie Bowell to resign, and directly paved the way for the Liberal Party to sweep the 1896 election, putting Francophone Wilfrid Laurier in power. Section 3. Laurier's slippery compromise, walking the political tightrope. All right, so the election is over, but the problem? Very much still alive. Now, it was entirely on Prime Minister Laurier's shoulders to fix this intensely divisive crisis, one that was tearing English and French, Catholics and Protestants apart without shattering the fragile nation. There's this brilliant 1896 cartoon called Slippery Ice that completely nails the vibe of the time. You see conservative Mackenzie Bowell visibly stressing out, grappling with the issue, while the new Prime Minister Laurier watches carefully from the side. Laurier had to walk this terrifying political tightrope between forcing remedial legislation to help the French and totally staying out of it to appease the English. One wrong step, and he'd take his whole government right down into the icy water. So, Laurier strikes a deal with Manitoba's premier, Thomas Greenway. It became known as the Laurier-Greenway Compromise. The rules were strict, but had just a bit of wiggle room. Schoolwork would be purely secular all day, but a religious representative could swoop in for the final half hour to give religious instruction. And here's the really key part. If 10 or more students in a district spoke a language other than English, they would be provided with a bilingual teacher to help them transition to English faster. You can probably guess the reactions to this. They were incredibly polarized. On one side, you've got Clifford Sifton, an English Protestant and key negotiator, cheering the settlement because, in his words, all denominations are placed upon an equal footing. But then look at the reaction from French Catholic Archbishop Adélard Langevin. He felt entirely betrayed. French Catholics were the pioneers. They had constitutionally guaranteed rights, And now Langevin was furious. They were suddenly stripped of their special status and tossed on the exact same footing as brand new immigrants. Section 4. Expanding West. Growing Tensions. Let's track this as Canada pushes its borders westward. The Manitoba crisis basically started a domino effect. By 1892, the Northwest Territories passed legislation completely axing French as an official language and cutting school support after grade 3. Fast forward to 1905, Alberta and Saskatchewan are created, and they want to keep those exact same restrictive policies. Once again, Laurier is forced into a corner. He compromises by allowing minorities to keep their separate schools, but legally binds those teachers to teach the standard provincial curriculum. While Alberta was being formed in 1905, Laurier gives this powerful speech defending his delicate Multicultural Balancing Act. He says, "Let them look to the land of their ancestors, but let them look also to the land of their children." It was a desperate plea, really, asking citizens to honor where they came from while working together to build a unified future for their kids. And you can actually see the real, on-the-ground results of these compromises in this fascinating 1908 photo of the Ukrainian Plum Ridge School out in Manitoba. Because of that Laurier Greenway rule allowing bilingual teachers for minority groups of 10 or more, schools exactly like this one started popping up. Notice the diverse faces of the kids, but check this out. Right in the front, they are proudly holding up a massive British flag. Seeing those Ukrainian kids holding the British flag really makes you stop and wonder, right? Did these bilingual schools actually pull off the assimilation that English politicians were so desperately pushing for? Or did they just give these communities a way to keep their cultural identities intact while still playing a part in Canadian society? It was this incredibly delicate, constantly shifting balancing act. Section 5. The Backlash in Ontario. Rights Stripped Away. But the fiercest backlash against French Catholic rights didn't stay out west. Oh no, it hit Canada's most populous province like a freight train. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, tens of thousands of Francophones left Quebec looking for work, flooding into Ontario. By 1911, they made up nearly 25% of Ottawa's population, and this terrified some English-speaking Ontarians. They were genuinely scared of a French Catholic takeover. So, what happens? Chasing the political support of those anxious English citizens, the Ontario government rolls out Regulation 17 in 1912. It was a completely sweeping, severe law that legally restricted French language education to just the first 2 grades. The deeply entrenched ideologies here are just staggering. Thanks to previous compromises, French Catholics couldn't even rely on English Catholics to back them up anymore. You have British Archbishop Francis Bourne flatly saying the Church's progress is blocked until, quote, the entire English mentality is brought into the service of the Catholic Church. Wow. Contrast that directly with Quebec politician Henri Bourassa. He's fiercely fighting back, arguing Canada is fundamentally an Anglo-French confederation and demanding the English recognize their basic right to conserve their language and teach it to their kids. The fallout from Regulation 17? Absolutely massive. This heavy-handed attempt to force assimilation backfired spectacularly. It ignited massive Francophone protests, fury, and was aggressively dragged through the courts and the press. And here's the real irony. Instead of erasing French culture in Ontario, it completely galvanized Franco-Ontarians. They fought back so hard that it cemented their distinct cultural identity. They even got their own official flag out of the struggle, and eventually, over a century later, in 2016, a formal apology from the government. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a crucial thought. All these tensions from the late 19th and early 20th centuries, it's the story of a country wrestling deeply with its very soul. So ask yourself, how do these early, fragile compromises over classrooms, language, and religion continue to shape how we handle cultural diversity and minority rights today? It's like a giant puzzle, and honestly, that question is just as relevant right now as it was over 100 years ago.